Everything outside appeared to be a serene watercolor picture, due to the gentle drizzle that had been falling since the late afternoon. I sat curled up on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea, letting the soft hum of the rain calm the noise in my head. The house was still warm and mine at least for the evening. I didn't expect anyone. I didn't plan on talking to anyone. But the knock on the door came anyway. I opened it to find him, my nephew, standing there, with his jacket soaked and hair dripping, a grin on his face, like he knew how unexpected this was. He just moved back to the city a month ago, and though we were close, I hadn't seen him since the last family gathering. I let him in without hesitation, handing him a towel and watching as he slipped off his wet shoes, like he belonged here. He had always been the charming one in the family, quietly observant but effortlessly warm. As he stood there drying his hair, I noticed how much he'd grown at 27. He carried a calmness that hadn't been there before. His voice was deeper. His eyes lingered longer. We sat by the small electric fireplace as the rain picked up, wrapped in silence that felt anything but empty. "So you live alone now?" he asked, casually sipping the tea I handed him. I nodded. "Since last year it's quiet, but I like it." He grinned, the kind that felt like he was seeing something in me that no one else had. Peaceful but not lonely. "You always made solitude seem like a choice." I wasn't sure how to react because there was something in his tone that was gentle but deliberate. He wasn't making fun of me or calling me offensive names like he used to. Instead, he was staring at me seriously, as if there was something about me that he just started noticing. We talked about how stressful his job had been since he moved, and as the hours went by, he relaxed, resting back in the armchair, his eyes wandering around the room before settling back on me once more. He suddenly said, "You always smell like vanilla and something warm." And I laughed uncomfortably. "I guess I've been lighting too many candles," I said, trying to downplay the significance of what he had said. He laughed, but he kept his eyes fixed on me. "No, you always did even years ago," he said. But something fluttered in my chest, subtle but unavoidable. I looked away, trying to calm the strange warmth rising inside me. He was still my nephew, but he was no longer a boy, and neither was I. As the evening wore on, the quiet between us grew more relaxed but tense in an unusual way that wasn't dangerous or incorrect. I just knew he waited until the rain stopped, and as he got up to go, he stopped and said, "I'll see you again soon," with a question that seemed almost uncertain. I nodded. Of course. I also noticed that something had changed as he was leaving. A door had opened, not just the one he came through. "The roads are still messy," he stated over the phone the following morning. "Mind if I come over again?" he asked. Without hesitation, I said, "Come." He arrived with breakfast in hand, a small smile playing on his lips, like we shared some quiet secret from the night before we ate together at the kitchen table, sunlight stretching lazily across the floor, and talked about everything but what was truly on our minds. There was an ease in our rhythm, but underneath it, something stirred unspoken, growing waiting as he reached across the table to pass me a napkin. His fingers brushed mine. It lingered for only a second, but that second spoke louder than anything either of us had said. I didn't move. I just looked at him, and he looked back, his eyes holding a stillness that made my heart shift. He didn't apologize. He didn't pull back quickly, like it was a mistake. He held my gaze, my breath caught, but I smiled like it meant nothing. Later that afternoon, I pulled out my journal. Writing had always been my outlet. I sat on the edge of my bed, pouring my thoughts onto the page about him, about confusion, about how something simple had suddenly become complicated. I didn't hear him approach until he spoke behind me. "What are you writing?" I tried to shut the book, but he was already by my side. He said, "Let me read it," with that smile that had always meant trouble. No, I said quickly. It's just personal stuff. His fingers slid the book from under mine, and he flipped a page. I could have stopped him, but I didn't. His eyes moved slowly and carefully over the words, and then he looked at me. You're writing about me, he said in a quiet voice, and I froze. He murmured, You never asked. I didn't refute it, though, because there was no purpose in it. I never knew you gave anything this much attention. I replied, I think about you too more than I should, but I don't want to lie to myself anymore. His honesty struck me harder than I had anticipated, and I looked at him closely. I saw a man who wasn't confused, a man who had spent enough time acting as though he didn't feel what he now obviously did. I didn't know if we were crossing a line, so I said softly, I don't either, but I knew that I've never felt more drawn to someone. The tension between us wasn't just chemistry. It was understand I didn't want to acknowledge how much space he had taken in my thoughts. So I kept myself occupied with cleaning, errands, and reading anything to take my mind off the nagging feeling that something had changed and that neither of us knew how to approach it again. The following few days were quiet, but not in the typical sense. I found myself checking my phone more than necessary in anticipation of a message that didn't arrive. Then, late one evening, his name appeared on my screen along with the words, Can I come over? I didn't respond right away because I knew my response would be taken seriously, but I typed back the only thing I really felt. Yes, he came quieter than before, with no smile or teasing charm, just stillness, as if he had spent hours contemplating before knocking on my door. For the first minute, we just stood there, staring as if something invisible had formed between us, and we were both terrified to tear it down. Eventually, he said, I've been trying to make sense of this. So have I. I admitted. He exhaled, like he'd been holding something heavy. I don't want this to be a mistake, neither do I. But it doesn't feel like one. He added, voice low. It feels like the most natural thing I've never understood. I nodded, and in that moment the confusion began to soften. What we felt wasn't built overnight. It had been years in the making, hidden under casual hugs, playful conversations, and those unspoken moments that used to mean nothing, but now meant everything. It was never planned, never expected yet. Here we sat together closer than before. Without pretending, he opened up about his past, about relationships that never made him feel truly seen. I listened, drawn not just to his words, but the way he looked at me, as if I was the missing part he didn't know he needed. And I told him things, too, about loneliness, about strength, about how I'd built a life I was proud of, yet how rare it was to feel genuinely understood in it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He just held space for it, you see me? I whispered, almost startled by my own voice, and he nodded, as I believe I always do. There was no hurry, no crossing into the physical realm, no desperate declarations, just the presence of something warm and unsaid that sat between us like a quiet agreement that this mattered, and whatever it became, it wouldn't be casual. It wouldn't be a secret regret hidden away as the night grew darker. This time, the silence was consoling. It said everything our mouths couldn't, and when he finally stood to go, he said, soon. He started coming more frequently without needing an excuse, sometimes just to bring coffee, other times just to sit in the same place, no words needed. There was a rhythm now, natural, easy, and unspokenly intentional. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't hurried, but it was real. And the way he said it felt like a promise. Days turned into weeks, and what had begun as unexpected glances and quiet conversations had become something neither of us tried to define, but both of us felt completely. How I always looked outside before responding to in-depth questions, how I caressed my necklace while thinking, how I always kept the spoon in my coffee for a little too long, and how I also noticed him leaning slightly forward when listening to his layers of laughter. I asked him one evening, "Does this ever feel strange to you?" To see how his energy changed when he genuinely cared. After giving it some thought, he said, quietly, "It feels honest." There came a moment when the silence descended with an unfamiliar weight, and we stopped hiding and acting as though this connection was casual. It wasn't about roles or age, but rather about how we saw each other beyond labels and what the outside world might say. He reached for my hand without asking for anything. Just holding it meant more than any confession could. There was warmth and trust that went beyond attraction. He wasn't looking for excitement, and I wasn't trying to fill a void. Rather, we were meeting each other in the middle of our truths. So I asked him, "Where does this go from here?" "I don't know," he responded, "but I know I want to be wherever you are." When I read some of it aloud to him, he listened as if every word mattered. "That's us," he said. "Yes." And I smiled, "That's us." It wasn't poetic, it was real grounded, and it meant more than grand gestures. I started writing again, but this time not to escape, but to capture. Words flowed more freely, now pages filled with thoughts about love that didn't follow the rules, about quiet moments that made the loudest impressions, about how comfort could turn into something breathtaking if you allowed it. We never tried to put a name to it. We didn't sit down and decide what term would make it acceptable or understandable. We just kept choosing to show up repeatedly in small ways in open discussions and shared silences. One day, without realizing it, I stopped waiting for what would happen next and stopped worrying about how it started or what other people might think. Instead, I was just living in the truth of what we had. Something tender, something rare, something that grew from the unexpected and blossomed because we let it. He didn't need to say, "He loved me." I saw it in how he stayed, how he listened, how he looked at me, like I was the beginning of something he never wanted to end, and I loved him back quietly, deeply, completely.